So, welcome everybody to this session on interoperability in personal data stores. My name's Joss Langford and I'm going to be your host for this session. It's really exciting to have such a knowledgeable group of experienced people to be able to talk to us about their work on increasing the interoperability between personal data stores. I'm not going to introduce the speakers because they're going to be much better placed to do it than I am, but you can see them on the slide that's up on the screen already now. They're going to explore how personal data stores can interoperate, and they're going to talk about how PDS interoperability relates to other initiatives based on Mydata principles. So the structure is that we're going to have 4 talks, each of about 12 minutes, and then followed by that, I'm going to hand over to Chris, and we're going to have a panel session for 40 minutes. We have some time after each talk, so put your comments in the chat and I will coordinate those back to the speakers or raise your hand if we've got the time. As we move into the panel session, there's a little bit more time available. So if you raise your hand there, then we'll try and get your perspective, give you the opportunity to speak from the floor and get everybody involved in the discussion. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Salman to start his presentation, and then he will hand on to Christoph. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joss, and hello, everyone. So this is an introduction to CEPS, which stands for Common Endpoints for Personal Data Stores. I'll try to explain that with some emoji animations and a little bit of historical context. So you all know the web was first conceived as a network of peers where all the network nodes were just smiley emojis, all equals happily communicating with each other. And we all know that it hasn't quite turned out that way, because historically, when the web took off in the 90s, it took like millions of dollars just to set up a web service. So you got companies like Yahoo who spent those millions, and to make money, they showed you some ads. Then some other companies realized that if they had a lot of data about you, they could sell their ads for more money. And that proved to be a really powerful business model. So eventually they became the kings of the internet. And that's the main operating model that was established for the web. Of course, a lot of us here think that model sucks. Where we don't want these kings to control our data. So, we've been begging for our data and we've been passing laws like GDPR to get our data. But ultimately, even if we succeed in these efforts, I think a lot of us believe that these kings would still be kings and we just continue being their loyal data subjects because they control all our data. So some of us think it would be much better if this data was sitting on our own personal servers, our personal data stores. These would be data stores that we fully control. Of course, existing incumbents won't like that because they love having your data. So they'll tell you, oh, consumers don't want PDSs. But if interested developers create applications that store data on our data stores and our PDSs, then really we would be the kings. So there are a number of PDSs out there created by enthusiasts like myself, nonprofits like Own Your Data, some profit companies like Fujitsu and Personium, not to mention, of course, Solid and Inrupt. The problem is that these PDSs don't really work with each other because each one of them has their own standards, interfaces, APIs, and they're all isolated and they're largely uninhabited islands. So the question is, why would anybody want to build applications for a PDS based on some proprietary interface? And not many would. Because without any apps, you don't have any data either. So what's the use of having a PDS? I guess it's a difference between a 1990s feature phone instead of a modern smartphone. How many people still use feature phones? Not that many. You can't even find a feature phone emoji. So I had to use this landline instead for this slide. But you get the point. So at the Mydata conference last year, Christoph, Dixon, and I got together and said, well, wouldn't it be nice if we have one interface, one API that any application developer could use to communicate with any PDS? So when an app developer creates an app that works for one PDS, effectively, it would work for all PDSs. And this would motivate app developers to create more apps. And if there are a bunch of apps using the same API, then more people would actually use PDSs and find them useful, and they would attract app developers and PDS users. And then you can start to imagine that there could be a rich ecosystem when each of us has her own server and controls all our data. So that's what we started to define. And earlier this year, the three of us really agreed on a specification for apps to read and write to any data store. That's called CEPS 1.0. So as an example, let's say there's a great calendar app on a calendarapp.com. When I sign up for the app, I can tell Calendar app that my server is salmanff.com. That's my personal server URL. And I tell my server I want to use Calendar app, and that Calendar app can access my data store on my server, but specifically only one data table called com.a-calendar-app.entries. So then all Calendar app needs to do is to create a calendar entry and store it on my data store, is to send a post request like this. And that's it. Instead of my data sitting on a Calendar app server, it's sitting on my server. And all my server needs to do is to make sure that if an authorized app writes to CEPS/write/table name, as we've defined, that it stores in the right place, and all the app needs to know is my server's URL. And that's CEPS 1.0. Basically, you realize that all applications ultimately use 4 or 5 basic commands to read, write, update, and delete data. That's CRUD. And in CEPS, we agreed that if all PDSs use the same paths to allow apps to read and write records, then app providers can write their app once, and it can work on all PDSs that adopt CEPS. Sorry. And we also put together a small authentication mechanism based on OAuth 2 to make sure that the app is authorized to take that action. And that's it. So let me give you an example. Oops. Sorry about that. There we go. So I created this extension, this Chrome extension called Viewlog, which is a bookmarking extension. And what you can do with it, so let's say if you're on this page, you can go to, oops. Oh, there we go. You can go to any web page and basically highlight text on it. And you actually have a little command where if you want to highlight text in different colors, you actually turn on edit mode and you get your highlighter and you can sort of highlight whatever you want. And you can also have this other functionality where you sort of get on a link, and instead of clicking the link, you don't go to that link. You say, add that to my inbox. Hey, I want to know more about this guy. We'll add him to my inbox. And what happens is that if you go to your Viewlog app, you'll see your highlights, you'll see your inbox, so you can then go see, hey, this is Chris, right? And that's your inbox. So there's a bunch of extensions that have the same functionality. The big difference with this, with Viewlog, is that it saves your data on your server. So here I'm logged on, it's actually a demo user account, but I'm logged on to my server, salmanff.com, and I'm storing all of my data on my own personal server. And actually, so you can I'm sort of go to salmanff.com. You see that I've sort of highlighted these links. So that's a demonstration of how CEPS would work. And so going back to my presentation, what this means is that I'm actually empowering my data, because my data is not stuck in some other server's data silo. It's sitting on my server, which also means that someone else can write an app that accesses that data. So if you have Viewlog installed, maybe you can download another app that monitors your inbox or analyzes your bookmarks or whatever. The point is that you don't have to ask for Viewlog's permission to access your own data. It's the app that needs to ask for your permission to access your PDS. You're fully controlling your data, and your data is empowering you rather than Google or Facebook. And all that can be done with CEPS. So in my view, the next step is for us to figure out how we can share data among PDS users. So let's say I want to share a bookmark with another PDS owner, if I want to share my location history sitting in my data store with another service. To do this, the different nodes need to authenticate against each other. If I want to share a bookmark with Dixon, my PDS needs to know that Dixon is who he says he is when he tries to access my data. Normally on the web, you would use OAuth and OpenID Connect, which is based on OAuth for this kind of thing. The problem with OAuth is that it has some manual steps, which makes it somewhat inappropriate for a decentralized world. Let me try to explain that. And if you want to share some data with a friend, you either have to set up an account on an app, which is a manual process. You set up a password, get a verification email, all of that. Or you can sign up using Google or Facebook IDs, assuming you already have set up accounts for that. But for OAuth to work, the app also needs to have signed up with Google or Facebook and registered as an app. And the developer of the app has to literally cut and paste a piece of text called the client secret from the Google and Facebook website sign-up pages. And she needs to paste it in her app server for the whole thing to work. And that's a very manual process, and it works fine for a world where the Facebooks of the world control our identity. But if we imagine a world without these kinks, if we want to use OAuth, we don't have to be signing up on each other's servers and setting up passwords there, and which would be pretty unpractical. So we've proposed with CEPS as kind of a mechanism where peers can authenticate with each other automatically without relying on centralized authenticators or exchanging secrets manually or forcing people to use the same app in order to share data. The mechanism is based on the GNAP proposal, but instead of the usual manual cut and pasting of secrets, it has what Justin Richard, who's the creator of GNAP, called an out-of-band callback mechanism, which is a way for the two PDSs to connect to each other automatically and authenticate each other without the need for a third party to act as like the centralized authentication authority. So there we go. The proposal is still in draft form, and we haven't all agreed on it, but that's what we're working on. And in fact, a lot of the people in this session are regulars in the Mydata Common Endpoints bi-weekly calls where we debate these kinds of things. And we also got together and organized a session. So many of us will be talking next about related topics. And obviously, if you're interested, you can check out the CEPS 2.0 document, which is linked here as well as on the KikoChat website. And you can also send us an email at info@ceps.dev.
Salman, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think what we've agreed really is hopefully if there's a little bit of time after Christoph talk, then I'll put out for questions for both of your talks as we discussed earlier. So thank you very much for that. What I'd ask you to do is just for the people in things to paste those links into the chat channel while you come offline. And I'll invite Christoph to pick up the next presentation.
And I will stop sharing.
Thanks a lot. I share my screen and click present. So do you already see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thanks a lot, Joss, Salman, for introducing CEPS. I also want now to contribute my story about CEPS, where I said we were sitting together last year in Helsinki having a beer and talked about this. We built CEPS 1.0, basically where we said, okay, let's start with a very small example. And the next step, actually, we received funding from the NGI DAPSI project. And what we did is creating a digital immunization passport together with the people from Human Colossus. And what I want to quickly do in this presentation, it's just 2 slides, explaining what we did in this project or still doing and what we learned actually. And the goal was in this project, basically what you see, if you see, hopefully you see my cursor, basically we really wanted to do a human-centric personal data management. So we put the user in the center and said, okay, especially now with COVID, we said, how would an digital immunization passport look like when we put actually in a more complex example, how would this look like when you need all the interfaces between different components? How can CEPS live up to those promises and how does it work? So basically here, a short intro to this project. What we did is 3 data flows. You see here on the upper left side, basically you have hospitals, a lab, basically a doctor's office, who gives you a certificate that you were immunized. So we did not choose coronavirus, but we said, okay, it's a yellow fever, maybe you know it. If you travel around, you have this yellow card, this international immunization passport, and we said we want to make a digital version of it. And what you usually do, you go with this yellow card to a doctor's office, you receive a shot, and then maybe you get the stick in it, some unreadable notes from the doctor. And basically, when you have now a digital version of it, you require kind of technology stacks that we put into a semantic container. And what we also said, okay, how would it look like if you get a verifiable credential? How to create this? And then we wanted to make this verifiable credential available to a personal data store, but the interface actually should be mimicked by CEPS. The second data flow is then when you have such a verifiable credential, how can you prove then if you are at an airport or some other authority where you want to prove that you have received this verifiable credential, what is necessary there? So what toolchain do you need? And what are also, again, the interfaces to make this information available? And on the third data flows that we implemented, we said, okay, so there is now a lot of personal data here in this personal data stores, be it the only data vault, be it Personium, be it Freezer from Salman. Is it possible, or what is necessary to share this information back with the government, back with some hospitals that you say, okay, I have received now immunization and I want to provide information about a survey, how I felt 1 week after I received the immunization, how, if there were some symptoms in the coming weeks, how can this work? How can I share some additional information that I have maybe stored in my personal data store, and I want to give this in a traceable and a secure way? So basically, this was the setting. This was the proposals that we submitted to the NGI TAPSI project, and where we got together with Human Colossus funded. And those were actually the learnings that we had in this project. It's still ongoing. The next milestone will be end of January, where we have the first big presentation. Three things I want to focus on. First, it was a huge benefit to have CEPS 1.0 to already have kind of a structure that we said, okay, what are the topics that we need to focus on? There are, Salman already mentioned it, those topics about creating, reading, updating, and deleting data. How can this work? There was about work on authorization, basically because we had also components from the Human Colossus Foundation. What types of authorization are necessary? One thing that we run a little bit into is service discovery. So you have those different components. How do you start up the system? What starts first? How do you connect those different things? But those were the things that actually we quickly solved. Where I saw a few challenges were actually just the endpoints alone is not enough. We also need actually to look into the data structure. So to have a common way how we exchange our JSON files, what should be the structure, what meta attributes are we actually providing. And then we found out we don't have just a single identifier, actually we have multiple identifiers because different components just use different ways how we identify a record. We worked with from Human Colossus Foundation, the OCA, a way to describe records. So also schema works that was doing, but there was also some questions. Is this the right way? Should we use something different? And I think this is also very important if you have a very heterogeneous landscape to agree on how you exchange this data. And then what was also actually an important topic, and I think this can also be future work of CEPS, is a lot of talk and this governance is about consent management. So actually when I give data to someone else with data sharing, that I need to have some form of consent and documented consent. How can this be described? So with On Your Data, we have worked quite a lot with usage policies, but there are also other ways from the Kantara initiatives. And it would be interesting to have kind of a mapping between those different initiatives. And another thing is, of course, provenance. How do you document what steps your data have already taken, and how to make can you make this interchangeable? So the thing is, I think it's a very good start that we have already done with CEPS, but the longer, at least for me, I work on these topics, the more question actually came up, and there are still quite a lot of open topics that we need to solve, but this is actually the nice part of it. And I think, yes, on the next slide, I have collected a few links when I make this available. And this was basically my contribution to this session. And I'm now happy to receive questions. I just stopped the sharing. I hope you have seen it. And also to Salman and me, maybe have a few minutes where we can discuss it.
Christoph, thank you very much. I'll start just to ask a factual question from the chat while you were talking. There's loads that's been going on in the chat, so keep that flowing through. I can see Chris watching it very closely, and he's not going to have any of his own questions left when it comes to the panel. There was a question there from David about the semantic standard that you use within the study that you just presented. Can you give us any information about that?
Yes, so for provenance, we use the prof ontology. This is right now just about to document the source of data where we currently work on. There's also a functional ontology where we want to describe also the processing mechanisms. This is not yet there, but what we already have is a prof ontology. For consent management, there's a usage policy language that is currently further developed in the TPVCG, and I always forget TPVCG. It's some common vocabulary working group. This is heavily influenced by the GDPR terminology. So those standards we're using, those are the main points, basically. And we are also heavily using things based on JSON LD.
Brilliant, thank you. And Salman, a question for you. I think this is we're going to come back to this. You talked in your presentation about authorization and OAuth, and there's a bit of a chat about that, which is going to continue. What about permissions? I mean, it's one thing have an app having an authorization, but how does that add up to the actual permission, or you could say even consent that sits behind the request? How do you manage that?
Yeah, thanks for that. Sure. So the way we envisaged it with CEPS is that any application that you install on your personal data store has a manifest for those who are more technical. And so when you install the app, the manifest sort of prompts your personal data server to say, hey, do you want to grant these permissions? And basically those permissions, you can think about it sort of like your iPhone. When you have an app, it asks for, let's say, the permission to track your location. And so you would go inside the operating system of your iPhone to say, yes, I would grant the app permission. The same thing here. You would go onto your personal data server and say, such and such an app can read, write to that data store, basically, or that data table. And that's how you would manage the basic permissions of read and write. And as Christoph said, there's more complexities that would be coming down the road where you would manage more complex things. And we haven't gotten there yet.
Christoph, have you got anything that?
What I wanted to say is we have this concept. This is, I think, one important work in CEPS, that we said, okay, what terms are we actually using? And this is terms of tables. So different repositories where you have data. And for each table, you can actually specify what are the permissions, if you can read, write, update, or delete. Here we also used this CRUD scheme, what each app, which permissions it has to access just reading a table, writing a table, and so on. So this is the granularity level where we are currently. But there's actually also work now that we do it on a record level, but this is steps 2.0, still discussing a little bit.
So there's a lot of discussion and questions within the channel around the use of decentralized identities with PDSs. And I wonder, Christoph, how you could see that working in the case study that you've recently put together. How would that be impacted by using a decentralized identity?
So what we do is for DIDs, semantic containers now have a DID. Basically, there's a document that describes the endpoints that are exposed by this semantic container. It should also be possible, this was another project where we said for purpose-based data sharing, that you have a DID document that points basically to your personal data store and says, okay, in this event of an emergency, here I have stored emergency information, and this is the way how you can retrieve it. So this is currently how we use identity management, but this is, yes, it works, but I'm not so happy with it right now. I think it's a first step, but as I said, just the beginning. There should be actually more behind it.
Brilliant. I'm sure that's something that we will come to later on. I think we're doing quite well on time. So actually, I think we're going to have a very lively panel session. I want to make sure Chris gets all the time he needs. So I'm going to ask Harri to pick up from where you left off there, Christoph. Thank you very much for your presentation. Harri.
All right, let's see how the PowerPoint sharing goes. So can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we
Yes.
can. It's a little bit small on your screen. We're seeing mostly your screen.
Now
share
it's
rather than your app. Perfect.
Yep.
Yes, full screen. Right. So as I was shown as a picture earlier on, I've been participating on CEPS work, although Mydata share, the operator from Mydata group actually is in no means a PDS. So we have wanted to study and go into the interoperability from the perspective which is not from the starting point very comfortable for us as an operator. And I have a fairly conceptual presentation, too many slides probably for my time, but let's see how far we can get with those. Those of you who may know the Mydata share background and how it works, we are a permissions operator, or permission operator. So one of the key factors on our product is that we claim that we actually don't touch the personal data. Okay, well, the permissions or the consent records, they actually are by regulation personal data, but the actual substance data, which is basically behind those permissions, we don't transfer those, we don't touch those. The other point, well, our operative mode is a bit more towards the problems of approach, which Salman described earlier, that you have to do the registrations for your data providers and consumers as organizations and a priori. So there's little automatic discovery or automatic registration of assets. And now also the PDSs, they majorly work with people, not organizations. So not services as such, but they are apps used by people. And in the Mydata share concept, the person who is managing the permissions, they are using the operator provided wallet, which is, we will see how later relates to the PDS models. So I wanted to draw a sort of a typical PDS model. The guys can challenge me on this later on. We can have a good chat on this. But it's a storage, basically, and reading the CEPS spec, it's also typically an app it's in itself. So there's sort of the different concepts of PDS working as a storage, and then it is having an instantiation of some sort of app which the individual is using. And then the whole CEPS spec is about how to share data between basically two individuals between two different PDSs. So the starting point is quite different. Identity and permissions basically are managed on the PDS level, whilst in the previous Mydata share model, we actually offer sort of it's a federated IDP model. So how would integrating of the personal data store actually work? There's a plethora of use cases that you need to cover to get things going. And many of these are still not even related to or yet in the use case phase, which was described on the previous slides. You have to basically be able to display lists of available different PDS services in Mydata share type of operator. So there needs to be this discovery function. You would have to be able to register or deregister PDS. If you are a Mydata share wallet user and you have a PDS somewhere, you have to be able to have a way to bring it in or bring it out as an sort of organization level. And then also on the personal level, you'd have to do basically the linking of your PDS and the permission operator, starting from the PDS perspective, or maybe then starting from the Mydata share wallet perspective. Then we don't have this concept of PDS record, which is the atomic data item on CEPS. So that would have to be converted into a data provider, which is basically something that represents a data resource behind an API of an organization in Mydata share. Then this might be an existing PDS record on your PDS, or then you just move in the file into your PDS, how you bring in this out to the permission operator. managing the granularity. You might be sharing your whole table, your whole folder of photos, or you might be just sharing one particular record, one photo within that structure. That would need to be also managed between the different entities in the architecture. Deletion, moving, and then also displaying the PDS related permissions. You have to be basically maintaining either sort of perfect copy of the permissions you have been given on the PDS, or you would have a subset of those which you have basically linked then through the PDS Mydata share related services. So these ones I'm going to go through pretty fast. This is how we see the identity function in our operator. It's an OpenID or SAML-based ID service where the individuals are authenticated either with public or pseudonymous identifiers, and then also the services need to be pre-registered. They must have a client ID there to be able to be present as services within the system. So, as I was showing earlier, PDSs actually have their own IDPs usually. So we would have to introduce a setup where we would bring an opportunity or alternative for the PDSs that, well, I'm not using my IDP, but rather I'm using this external one. And then you would have to do that registration. This is sort of a priori kind of things which could be done once you have running services applications. And I'm not going to touch the IDP federation or single sign-on function at all. That gets fairly complicated, but it's probably doable. And the permission management is the place where we are storing those things that Jos was mentioning, that basically beyond the authorization and authentication, we note down the permissions on a regulatory level. So that what was the legal reason why this permission is requested and what it covers and etc. So that's where we have the permission artifacts. And then we basically initiate all those permission requests through the operator. So there's no peer-to-peer functionality too much here. So what's the delta visible here? You would have to register and handle the individual control PDS data with external permission management. And all the reds there are at least somewhat tricky things to do. To some extent, you could basically replicate those PDSs as typical data sources or data sinks from the Mydata share perspective. But then also from the wallet perspective, as we don't typically have any visibility for actual personal data, there would have to be an API or something where we can basically use it for checking out what information individual actually has within his registered PDS. Some complexity. This is a picture from the CEPS 2.0 draft. It's something that Salman did, and I've been commenting on that, and we've tried to also get comments from Justin Richer, who is the OAuth2 or Mr. OAuth in the identity space. This pretty much it's about having somewhat decentralized model and different model, which is this GNAP, or how we would map the CEPS to the GNAP. But then we would have to do even more splits here if we introduce the Mydata share type of operator onto the picture. So I'm just illustrating here that it's going to be getting a bit complicated, and we don't claim any CEPS compatibility with our product at the moment. I wouldn't like to start doing this kind of integration mappings to multiple PDSs if the business needs that, but rather expect that everybody gets their act together first on the PDS to PDS level, and then we can intervene or be participating on how to then also let operators like us to be basically the permission identity manager for this kind of a environment. Yeah.
You've got about 2 minutes left there. So.
Okay, well, I should be pretty much over with this. I wanted to show what endpoints and methods we have on the Mydata share. Those are documented on the mydatashare.com/dev. So that would be basically one starting point to start merging those approaches. And that's it. So I can take in some questions and answers even.
Harri, thank you very much, and I apologize for interrupting you at an inappropriate.
No problem.
There's a question that was being discussed a little bit in the channel while you were speaking, and I think you're a great person to tackle this question, which is about what's the difference between a wallet and a PDS? What are your views on that?
Well, is the question from the self-sovereign identity perspective, or is it from the sort of old-fashioned centralized Mydata perspective? That's
as the speaker,
first question.
As the speaker, you have the privilege of choosing which question to answer.
Okay, well, I can try to answer both, but as I said, so the wallet we currently have in the Mydata share is it's not an SSI wallet. It's basically holding your identifiers. So it could be basically a collection of pairwise DIDs as well. But the point is that we just hold permissions and identifiers about people, and then the data flows through APIs. So there needs to be an endpoint with the data provider or data source, and there needs to be a client on the data consumer side. The data consumer sends a permission request for the end user, where he or she reacts to it on the wallet. And if the answer was positive, basically with that answer, you can go and fetch or try to get the data from the data provider, who will do the introspection against that token from the permission operator, us. And that's it. So basically, you react onto your permission requests through the Mydata share wallet of today. If you compare it then to the SSI wallet and PDS, well, if the PDS would be just storing your verifiable credentials and your identifiers, well, there isn't really that big of a difference. But basically, how CEPS handles personal data is it's not basically a container of credentials as a PDS. Very quick and maybe a bit confusing answer.
No, I think what you bring out is the point is that the answer to that question depends on your perspective, and it helps me because I can see from some perspectives why they look confusingly similar, and from others they're very different. So certainly that helped me. Right, Harri, thank you very much. We're still doing brilliantly on time, speakers. That's fantastic, and I'd like to hand on to our next speaker, Mr. Hwang. Are you available? Brilliant. We can see your screen. I can't hear you at the moment.
반대로 하셔야 돼요.
I can hear you now.
So we rehearsed this, and I think he's showing the other one, the other screen right now. Hold on one second.
오케이, 됐나요?
That looks
잠시만요.
good. I can hear you.
Just a moment. 아, 이게 안 보이는데? 이쪽 화면이 그러니까 스크립트를 봐야 되는데 별도로 떠야 되는데 이게 여기 있던데. 잠시만요. 됐나요? 됐죠? 이제. 근데 이게 공유가 안 돼서. 풀스크린을 하면. 풀스크린 이거 보시죠. 네? 여기 있어서 스크립트지, 그치?
I think that's not ideal. But
Okay. Sorry. So basically, he's going to just use this screen right here, and because he has a script that he needs to read, and yeah, we'll try to get it done in the next 10 minutes. Okay.
No problem.
Okay, sorry, I'm not good at English. Please understand even if you're clumsy. Hello, I'm Jeongwook from Fabianek, specialized in develop open API and Mydata. It's an honor to having an opportunity to introduce Mydata in Korea. This is the time limit. It's hard to let you know the detailed information. Let me explain the overall content. In Korea, government agency called Financial Service Commission is in charge of Mydata reflecting GDPR and PDS. We had to revise the three laws that have been in existence for a long time related to the personal information to ensure the sovereignty of personal information. These laws have been revised to ensure the identity of personal information by gathering opinions from various expertise and time. In particular, we put more effort into the area of contentful personal information provision, guarantee of autonomy, withdrawal of contentful information provision, and request for deletion. I'd like to introduce about Mydata in Korea briefly. Mydata consists of data holders such as the owner of personal information, institutions or companies storing personal information, Mydata business operator who want to use data of information subject, and the support center that guarantee stability in the movement of personal information. Understanding this fourth thing can help you understand the presented military wear. The process of issuing certificate and certificates is carried out in advance between Mydata business operation and data holder. If the information subject agree to send personal information to the assembler or Mydata business operator, the data holder verifies the contents of the information subject and provides personal information. In order to ensure the stability and reliability of personal information transmission, standard for data expression and telecommunication have been set. Also, industry that can provide personal credit information have been prescribed live and available items are material to provide. For example, there are bank transaction information, card ownership and usage information of credit card company, and insurance company subscription detail. You can refer to the example of API provision by introductory on the left. The API development guide is provided by documenting all of these. And the data holder developed the system in accordance with this standard API development guide. Next, the overall composition of Mydata. In order to use personal information, a connecting system between the data hold and Mydata operation is needed. Data holders are required by law to establish a system that can provide personal information by next August. And this is applies or industry mentioned before. Data holders are obliged to provide data, but they can also become Mydata operator that's all can collect and use personal data. So that platform is not only the provision system, but also the system that collects and uses data. Fabianek is a company that specializes in research on development of Mydata platform. Since Mydata collection platform is highly variable depending on the environment of the agency and company, I would like to focus on the gallery on the legally maintained this provision platform. Let me tell you more. Let me tell you more about Mydata provision platform. Mydata provision platform consists of API service, management support service, and connection to support center. API management service contain API management task, search and registration, deletion of various APIs. Management support service contain authentication and security, administrator side, and legacy link task. Connection to support center refers to connection with the introduction that support API. It is developed by reflecting telecommunication and API security system present by API guidelines such as TLS 1.3 and OS 2.0. This is the system configuration of Mydata platform, an example to help you understand. Mydata platform consists of a provision platform server to provide common customer credit information safely and quickly. A collection platform server to collection customer credit information that existed outside. And management and operation server and is composed to enable sending, receiving of data between DMZ, international network, and the external network. Next, let me tell you about the Mydata API transfer flow. It is implemented based on OS 2.0 plus JWS, which verifies the identity of the information subject, verifies the Mydata operator through the authorization code, and verifies the access authority to the API using the access token generator after operator verification. Next, the method of authentication full information subject. An authentication process is required for the information subject to consent to provide personal information. Authentication can be carried out into the ways individual and integrated. Individual certification shall be two-factor authentication method that verifies at least two of the means among knowledge verification. Ownership is verification and feature verification. The data holder is free to choose the authentication method. Integrated authentication is a common authentication provided by the soft center. I think it will proceed in the direction of using integration authentication in Korea. So far, I briefly explained about Mydata in Korea. It's not end with the provision and collection of personal information, but the effect can vary depending on how data is applied to which service it is applied. As shown in the example, we expect can provide more benefit and convenience to information subject by being used in various fields. I believe Mydata has a lot of energy, and it's going to be the mainstay of the new industry. Therefore, our company is also investing a lot in building Mydata platform and develop. In my opinion, in order for Mydata to activity, the prevision environment of a company must be established quickly, and the validation procedure must be carried out in areas where international standardization is possible, such as certification and security. Fabianek has standardized Mydata collection and prevision platform to functionality is state development of Mydata system. This can save your cost and time. We will continue to make effort to research and development of Mydata for each activation. Lastly, the picture you are looking at is my company vision. Thank you for listening. If you have another question, let me know by email or Slack. Thank you.
Okay, great. So in the interest of time, I am going to take the stage and go straight to the discussion. And the slides that you've seen, I think, are perhaps the most specific and very accurate information about Korea's current financial industry in terms of personal data that you'll find anywhere during this conference. So please do take a look at it if you are interested about Korea. Okay, so today we have Mehdi and Tom. Mehdi Medjaoui and Tom Haegemans for our panel. And we also have our presenters as our panelists as well. To introduce Mehdi quickly, I think my experience with him is as part of the steering group. He's been leading Mydata Global's steering group this year, and he's an API expert. Mehdi, would you like to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. I hope you hear me well.
I think you're muted.
No, I'm not. No.
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, so you can hear me, right? So yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, a little bit about me. Yeah, I was part of the.
Is it just me?
Yes, I think so, Chris. Yeah. So yeah, AirPods are horrible with the sound. I agree. I always have this issue. No, quickly, I'm a, let's say, entrepreneur in the software space. I've built a company called OAuth.io. So OAuth for developers that has been acquired in 2017. And I believe we should stop OAuth, or at least do another one better and corresponding to more of what has been shared. I'm also the founder of API Days Conference, the main conference series on APIs. And currently I'm working on GDPR.dev APIs and SDKs to make GDPR programmable and mix it with a new kind of OAuth protocol. Yeah, this is what I'm doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, Tom, would you like to introduce yourself? So just to give a quick introduction, Tom is a co-founder, I think, of a company that utilizes Solid. And so yeah, Tom, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you said it all. I think I'm a co-founder of Digita, and we contribute to the Solid specification. And also we build middleware for companies that want to set up a Solid server. And I'm also a researcher at the University of Leuven, where I was a professor before.
Cool. So thank you both for being here. I want to start off with something that Mehdi, that you said in the chat. You said that we need to kill OAuth. Would you be able to speak a little bit more on that?
You know, like as we say sometimes in French, if I translate, long live the king. You know, I missed it. No problem. My translation is not great, but yeah, no. The idea is we need to kill it and revive it. It has been a successful implementation. Many companies have adopted it for many reasons. Actually, it gives a lot of power. This is actually what Salman and others have been trying to. Yeah, the king is dead. Long live the king. Thank you. So OAuth is dead. Long live OAuth. Right. This is what I wanted to say. Yeah, we need to reinvent it. It successful implementation, but too much power on few actors. We just need to redistribute the value of OAuth, right? We need, as we said, we need to separate the data stores and the authorization managers, right? And OAuth will be great. We spend 13 years to evangelize all developers and companies about a protocol. I don't think we will be able to push them in a way for something completely new or different. We need to build on that traction, but we need to kill it and revive it. So that's the idea I wanted to share on this.
Great, thank you very much. So what I want to do at this point is I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I want to share a particular image. There, do you see that? Right. So this is from the Solid specification page. And here it's talking about the 3 different types of authentication that they have. So I think Web ID TLS, Web ID OIDC, which is based on OAuth, and then some alternative authentication mechanisms. So next question to Tom. Can you maybe explain how you are using Solid and whether you do use OAuth or maybe this other Web ID TLS?
Well, I'm not really the technical guy, so I can't go into much technical details. But we are using Solid in I think the same way as the other protocol has in mind. I think, but we have I think a very ingenious go-to-market strategy. I think the Solid specification and the other specification, I forgot the name. I'm sorry. it's about it's going about the specification the entire time. But I'm sorry, but we want to give people more control over their personal data, right? And we want to give them data ownership. I think our go-to-market is not so much based on creating apps to accelerate adoption, but it's more about putting data available or making data available in a solid compliant way, so that when there is data available, there will be apps created to access that data, right? And our vision is to first convince companies, organizations to make that data available. And then we believe that people will have so much usage or usefulness about the applications to access the data that they can also send friend requests and couple their other personal data stores as well, in which they can store their own data to then put pictures in there and likes and so on. So we think the go-to-market strategy is first to go to the organizations to make sure that there is some data available to the ecosystem, and then to focus on apps eventually.
Great, thank you so much. Right, so I'm showing on the screen here. So this is at least the how far I've gotten into looking into Solid. As you can see here on the right, there is this is pretty much, I think this is what a web ID is, because I was able to use this link here that I've highlighted in yellow and use it in many different Solid apps. And I think one of the things that they talk about is how they can use, everything is stored based on an URIs, right? And so Solid, at least to me, the thing that they promote or see as most important is interoperability, which is why I think Solid is very highly aligned with the work here at CEPS. And I guess it might be kind of a difficult question, given that you said you're not technical, but do you see reason, and do you see any, on the other hand, do you see any obstacles to integrating your company's solution with what has been presented here by the CEPS group?
No, to be honest, not really, because what we built middleware to support solid servers in a company environment. And of course, if we want to support solid servers in a company environment, we have to support all kinds of data stores, ranging from classical SQL stores and so on, but also to solid pods and maybe also CEPS data stores. So for us, it doesn't really matter as a company, but we made the choice to, for the moment, go for the solid specification. But of course, our middleware itself is designed to handle all kinds of personal data stores on a conceptual level.
Thank you. So before I go back to Mehdi, I did have some questions from that was requested of me to ask. So let me go ahead and see if I see if you can. So what made you choose Solid from the beginning?
Is it still a question for me?
Yes.
All right. Well, we chose Solid because, and maybe I'm not going to make myself popular in this kind of community, but we chose it because of, yeah, it's a W3C supported project. It's built by Tim Berners-Lee, which is the inventor of the World Wide Web. So it's, for us, it's becoming very easy to sell Solid in the way you can sell an open standard, because you just have to say it's from the inventor of the World Wide Web. It rings a bell everywhere. It gets a lot of attention of the press. Solid has already a very big community. It's backed by a commercial company who got an investment of 20 million euros. Inrupt. They are probably getting some more money soon. Yeah, that's sorry guys. But
no, that's fine. No, thank you very much. And okay, I guess one of the things that I think you probably might have probably did consider is how Solid seems to be decoupling the personal data from the apps, right? And so my understanding is that when you're creating apps using Solid, you don't really need to care about the structure of the personal data. Like you just kind of have your focus on these apps. And I guess so. The question, I think the last question that I would want to ask is this true? And do you find yourself spending most of your time looking into innovating and creating nice services for your customers rather than trying to handle their data in better ways?
That's a very good question. There are two types of apps very broadly. There are what we call normal apps. Of course, they're not normal, but they are normal in the sense that you already know beforehand what kind of data you will accept in your app. But you also have apps which we call data browsers. And in those data browsers, you don't know before what kind of data will be stored in the personal data store, right? So if you build a data browser, you can't possibly know what kind of data types will be stored in the Solid stores. So for those kind, we are currently building a data browser, and that's what we're currently focusing on because it will be it's very difficult, and we're thinking about creating a repository in which we link those kind of data types to web components or other components to be able to render it at runtime to make sure that we can support the data types that we need to support. But then the question about the apps is a whole different question, because then of course you know what kind of data types you will be going to expect. But then it's very interesting to see where you will get that data from. So there are two types of problems. So I think it will be very, very interesting to build apps, those two kinds of apps in a world where the personal data is vertically disintegrated from the applications. So I think it's a huge opportunity as well.
Great, thank you so much. If there's any questions to the panelists, then please do mention it. So I don't know if this is a question for. Actually, it doesn't look like it's a question for you, Tom. So I'm just going to go to the next part. And so Tom, I'll come back to you. Mehdi. Okay. So and thank you, Tom. Mehdi. So recently you've been talking a lot about API neutrality, right? And I think here is here's a blog. I think it was written by you, maybe Mehdi, but basically my understanding is that API neutrality has to do with giving people access to APIs as opposed to like their data. Could you talk a little bit more about this and then how you see it fitting into the idea of or the concept of PDSs?
Yeah, if we have the time, I would like to make some comments about the previous talk also. But yeah, API neutrality is just, as I said in an article written in 2012, right? It's like net neutrality for APIs. It's actually the ability, which can be regulation enforced or at least a term of service enforced, to let's say promise that you will not discriminate anybody about using your APIs, right? You will not revoke access for weird reasons because they are a competitor, because there is you consider there is no reciprocity into the value they take from your API and the data that the users granted you as identity provider to export on their platform, right? So all these companies, Facebook and LinkedIn and Google and all these companies have killed many applications who were accessing to their APIs to actually get the data of the users out, right, to another application. And when they were considering it was not aligned with their business model, they have killed it, right? And many companies did that. And actually the biggest one who fights for open source and the open web and blah, blah, blah. But they killed many of this. So the concept of API neutrality would be actually for companies to claim before regulation comes into the game, to say, look, yeah, we guarantee that our APIs have no gatekeeper, right? We allow everybody to use our APIs. Just an example, AWS, Amazon Web Services, has a no gatekeeper policy in their idea. So unless you do really weird stuff, they allow even competitors to be on AWS, right? You pay and that's fine, right? So that's the idea. It can be a volunteer commitment, or it can be a regulation, for example, like PSD2 and many banking regulation. PSD2, like a Payment Service Directive 2 in Europe, where banks are kind of obliged to grant access to APIs to all companies who are registered as a account information service provider or a payment initiation provider or whatever. But if they're registered, they have access to the API. If the user grants access for the third-party application to the API of the bank, the bank has to do it. So the concept of API neutrality is actually what it seems what we do with personal data stores and what you are doing with CEPS and others. All the presentation here are actually like, we think it should be the case, but for some companies, when there's money involved, you know, they forget, they put API in terms of services. And actually, I'm glad to tell you that we've just been granted by the Ford Foundation, and you know, the Sloan Foundation, a research about making API term of services, let's say, more readable, like a Creative Commons model, to make them at some point maybe machine readable. So at least neutrality would be we would know if APIs are neutral or not directly in the contract. So yeah, so just to explain API neutrality, that's the idea behind this.
Great, thank you, Mehdi. Can you said you had some comments about the previous talk, so
yeah,
you want to go on to that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quickly. It's late here. It's Friday. We've got a long week, so I want to become a little bit controversial but friendly, right? Radical candor, right? No, again, I'm like you all guys. I believe in personal data stores. I think it's the future, but I think at some point we are making it the wrong way. I think we have only two strategies, right? The first one is either we build this successful application, right, that everybody waits for to make this available, right? The TikTok or whatever, the Snapchat, whatever, however you call it. We build this massive user application that will make the data stores like a part of the experience, and that will make the thing. So either we do that and we have 100 million users and we fund the thing, either we do the opposite, like the Tesla model, what I call it. Actually, you build software for companies, right? You build APIs or software for many companies, like solutions. But inside this software, there is already the next step. Like Tesla, you know, they sell these Tesla cars, but the autonomous driver software is already there. And actually, when you rise up all the thing, right, now you have this army of autonomous cars, and we will have this army of APIs or companies who have implemented solutions who are directly compliant with what we do, right? But again, if we fight for a new protocols or even Solid, right? Again, we invited Solid to speak our events. Ruben has been here many times. We tried to make a conference about Solid, a track specific about Solid. We didn't have enough people having stories to share. The days of the standard where in the 1990s, you could be few players deciding a standard because the web is not there yet. It's not big yet. It's over. Now there are many force and power de facto protocols, right? So the classic standard is a lot harder. And can you imagine someone that like Tim Berners-Lee pushing for the web we want and having so few implementation of a standard? Because yeah, it's the fight of de facto standard who have traction, even if they're average like OAuth, versus the good, well-designed, well-thought for the good standard who are designed by committee and sometimes have issues, right? And I want just to raise this. Yeah, Solid is not standard, I agree, but let's say a set of definition and protocols, but it could be a de facto standard for the whole industry, right? And it's based on W3C standards, which are not used as much as we would like, and as I would like, right? So this is just what I wanted to raise. Either someone raise up and build this multi-massive application, either we gather to colonize the companies, but yeah, we need to do something, unless we will just do great stuff that few people will use and nobody at the end.
Yeah, but that's a very good point that you make there. It's a very good concern. We firmly believe that there is no way to build a killer app just yet to replace Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. I think the thing that we want to achieve, and I think that we're pretty successful at it, we are convincing governments, for example, to make citizen data available using pods. So one pod per user per organization. but those are just in the short term, they're read-only pods. So basically, they're just an open API that you can use to reuse your data elsewhere. But by doing that, you get as a customer or as a citizen, you are using Solid, and app developers will see that they can access your data if you want to, of course, at those governments and so on. So they're more inclined to build those apps. And when we have enough data providers that can populate such apps, then we can go to the next step, which is based on basically you get a writable solid pod in which you can also store your likes and your pictures and so on. But I think that's the most sensible way to go.
Yeah, I just want to say again in the chat there, right? We want to talk about personal data stores. Solid is one of them, but yeah, we want to talk about CEPS and others. Just one thing, you know, about governments. I'm the co-author of a report on API for governments that just won Europe from the European Commission that just went out 2 months ago. No, governments can't do. Even GDPR is a failure as a law and as a regulation. It has to be from the user, from the usage, yeah. Of course, this is my personal opinion, but yeah, we cannot believe in governments into making this happen. At least in Europe, I don't know other governments.
I disagree. We have a government here in Flanders that has committed to Solid and that is building such an API.
Okay,
so it's not an opinion, it's not an opinion, it's a fact.
Yes. So sorry. So I am seeing a lot of people saying that we should go back to CEPS, and I absolutely agree. The point of Solid, at least for me, is that it's based on the idea is about interoperability, and I think what we want to do here at CEPS is exactly that. And I think in terms of CEPS, the idea is to make PDSs or personal data stores interoperable. And one of the ways that I think we can do this is by having a good API design, right? And by API, I think what we mean here in terms of PDS is API of me, is the API of me. And one of our presenters, Salman, had a question specifically for Mehdi, and it was about, sorry, maybe Salman, do you want to ask it?
What is the question?
I forget exactly what the question was, but I think it was something.
I got it here. I got it here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So Mehdi, in pulling together an API, what is the best way to balance simplicity, that is ease of use and understanding, versus meeting more complex needs of developers and applications?
So an API is like a menu of a restaurant, right? If the API is the inventory of what you have in the fridge, not really great it's not the dining experience you want, right? If the API is just the floor plan, the furniture you have in the backend, you don't want to expose that anymore, right? You want a dining experience, right? So the idea is that you need to know your users, what the action, the capabilities they want to leverage, and represent the data, represent the capabilities that your backend they can deliver into actions or into resources that the developer wants to use, right? An API just for example, an API that just follow a data model, not great, right? Because you will not be able to change your data model unless you break the API, right? You know, so yeah, you have to make this work of design, the work of knowing your users, knowing your developers, and to enable them to do the API the way to have the API to represent what they want to do with it, more than actually what's inside in the backend. I love this Lego advertisement, where actually you have Lego bricks, who can be represented as capabilities of services, but you have the shadow of the Lego brick, right? And if you are still children at some point, the shadow of the Lego brick, you know, of a specific thing like here can be a plane, can be a car, can be. And we provide capabilities with APIs, but our users, they see the shadow of it. They see the representation of what's capable of. So you need to know your users. If you just make an API that describes how it works, yeah, you're missing the point, in my opinion.
Great. So so this idea of Lego bricks, at least to me, the way I understand it is that it's you're kind of putting together these building blocks. And one of the questions that, at least for me, comes up always is, how do I know at one point it is a building block, or how do I contain these functions? Is there a way that you could maybe describe that in terms of a personal data store, and how you would look at it from the viewpoint of a person?
So I often call me the /me, right? What's the /me, right? What represents like identity? And a lot of people have different opinions about it. But most of the time, the good way to use it is knowing what the user, the developer wants to do with it, but also thinks about what we call DDD, domain-driven design. And then you will represent the data you try to represent according to the specific domain, right? The business domain, as we say in English, sorry, business, sometimes it's not the best word, but let's say the context, right? That define the boundaries about how you want to do it. But not all the APIs for personal data would be the same. So that's the question I want to ask to Salman later and to other about CEPS is like, how will we decide, right? The representation of the personal data, right? That we kind of all agree of an API, and how we can make this API not a minimal, let's say a common denominator, right? But something that's really empower everybody about, having the capability to do what they want and not just represent like name, first name, last name, address, or whatever, right? And with so many personal data, how we do that, how we agree on this, and how we don't spend too many time, on this. I've seen some CRUD stuff, but again, CRUD stuff works on the short term, but on the long term, we need to think representation. We need to think, beyond and unified interfaces more than just CRUD and path. Right. So yeah, it's not easy. Just want to say it's not easy, but I would be glad to dedicate all the PDS conferences and all my time to make this happen. I believe in personal data stores, personal data TXT robot that will crawl and ask for authentication, and ask for permissions. I believe in this word, right? I want to make it happen, but how we do it with CEPS and how we make a common API for everything.
Great. Well, you're in luck, Mehdi, because we do have a bi-weekly meeting at CEPS, and you're more than welcome to join and
I've just
help
discovered
us.
that. Yes.
Great. I want to go back to Tom.
Sorry. Can I just interject one
absolutely.
minute, because Mehdi just pointed to a question which I think is really important, and thank you for pointing to the bi-weekly meetings. I think part of my question about the simplicity was exactly what referring to what you talked about, Mehdi. I think that and this idea of the representation is something we've been talking about, and the work like Ian has done and others may come into this. Our initial view was that ultimately apps define kind of their data structure within a JSON format. How does this become like, in a way, the or the way that I think about it, I shouldn't say that everybody thinks about it, how does this become kind of the @ or the hashtag of Twitter, right? How do you make these representations? Like if I come up with a hashtag, that becomes kind of the way that you define a particular object like a contact, and how does that kind of permeate without being too strict about standards, which is something that has happened in the past with where these definitions have become too strict and have stopped innovation and kind of the fluidity that less structured data brings. So that's kind of, but it would be great to have you as part of those discussions, which will be hopefully forthcoming in CEPS as well.
Right. So we do have only 5 minutes left. Maybe I just add here that the grant negotiation authorization protocol that's being created right now by Justin Richer and the IETF working group, I think it addresses exactly that issue. It allows for versatility and some of the registration issues that you mentioned earlier. So Mehdi, I hope to see you at the next meeting. And then let's see, Tom. Now that you are here, I think it's a good segue to go into business, right? So how do you see people or personal data? Like, what is your viewpoint on personal data, and how do you see your business differentiating itself from others that also use personal data?
Our business builds software, so other businesses can easily take part in a personal data ecosystem or personal data store ecosystem. So I think that's something quite new that we're doing right now. So that's how we differentiate ourselves. So we're not a data provider in any kind, or we're not selling personal data. So just selling software.
And that's really great because I think it absolutely follows the Mydata principles, and it's a really welcome, very nice to see type of business. So then I think in terms of CEPS, right? So right now you're using Solid. Probably your software is tailored to the Solid sort of a specification. How hard or how difficult do you think it would be to switch operations to, say, a new type of API like CEPS that's being built here? Would you see it as something that might conflict with your business? And
No.
if so, oh no, okay.
Not in any way. Our platform is designed, or our middleware is designed to solve all the other issues like consent management, ETL, workflow management, and so on. So it's designed to be able to handle a diverse set of data sources. So it wouldn't be difficult to add just another data source.
So Tom, can you give me the URL, the address of your website?
Yeah, it's digita.ai.
Digital.ai?
Without the L. So
digita.ai.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we chose the AI extension a couple of years ago, and we regret it.
Oh no, I think it's great.
Doesn't have anything to do with AI currently, but as a startup founder, you have to make choices, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to show our audience your website since you did take the time to come here, and I think it from what you said, it's the service that I think deserves at least a few moments of attention. Do you want to talk about how you see your company's role in Mydata? Are you potentially thinking of becoming an organizational member? Do you feel like CEPS would be a community that you would maybe want to send some of your developers to?
Yeah, perhaps. I think the thing that I want to emphasize is that we're all working towards the same goal, right? I mean, we're all working towards having more control over our personal data, having more transparency over our personal data. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind and not focus too much on the technology itself. I mean, in the end, we're just CEPS and Solid, they're just standards or specifications, right? But the end goal is to make sure that they are used. So whether it's Solid or CEPS, really, okay, we have invested in Solid, so I shouldn't say that I don't really care, because I do care a little bit that it's Solid, but in the end, I care most about having control over my personal data.
Great, that's a great way to end, I think. Joss, I think we have 1 minute left. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Chris, thank you very much for that presentation and for your facilitation of the panel session. There's a lot going on there, so I don't envy your job having to watch the chat channel and do that. And clear, to answer your question, the CEPS is the common endpoint for personal servers and data stores. So that's the specification that's been worked on by some of the members of the Mydata community. And I don't know what GNAP is either, so someone can put that in the chat as well. Thank you to all our speakers and contributors. I think it's been a very, very lively session, and certainly in the second half of the second day of the conference, it's brilliant, and it's a testament to all your expertise and energy. We've been able to keep the discussion very focused around interoperability for the whole 90 minutes, which is brilliant. And I think this is an area where we probably have the best opportunity within the Mydata community of making interoperability happen, and happen now for people. And we've talked about the benefits for individuals, particularly within the CEPS space. We've also been able to talk about the benefits for organizations in the solid space as well, because clearly there's a little shift of difference of focus there. This is a brilliant time to get involved in these communities. There's a channel that runs on the Mydata Slack channel called the Common Endpoints. Please get involved there. What we want to do out of this session is to be able to drive a broader audience for this work. And I think the speakers and the audience have done a great job with that today. There is an also brilliant opportunity to get involved with the CEPS specification. A couple of the speakers have explained how helpful this first version has been over the last 6 months in their development. The ambition is over the next 6 months to release the next version of that specification. If you've not been involved, now's a brilliant time to get involved, to understand what it could mean for you and to be able to shape it so that you're able to use it in the best possible way. This will intersect with some of the operators' work as well. And I think there's some realistic timetables for having some strong technical outputs from the Mydata community as we come through to the beginning of summer next year. So thank you again to all our speakers, to the panel, and thank you to the audience. We'll close now, but there'll probably be some time to hang around in the room for 15 minutes or so if people want to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charles. Thanks a lot all.
Thank you.